Welcome to the Blueprint, a Project STEM podcast. Today we have our trifecta on the pod with us. It includes me, Lil Hughes Watkins, founder of Project STEM, Keandra Bills Freeman, our Project STEM coordinator, and Valencia Johnson, one of our Project STEM OGs, as your host.
And we are excited to bring our special guest, Gabriel Solis. So prior to returning to Texas after violence in 2016, where he previously served as the project coordinator and associate director, Gabe worked as a capital post-conviction investigator for the Office of Capital and Forensic Writs, criminal justice research associate at the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University School of Law, and a project coordinator for the Guantánamo Bay Oral History Project at the Columbia Center for Oral History Research. Gabriel is the recipient of the 2018 Pushcart Prize for Nonfiction. His writings have appeared in Texas Monthly, Texas Observer, Oxford American, Scalawag, Cultural Dynamics, Insurgent Scholarship on Culture, Politics, and Power, and Kula, Knowledge Creation, Dissemination, and Preservation Studies. Gabe has also served as a consultant for the Ford Foundation's Reclaiming the Border Narrative Initiative, the NCAA Legal Defense Fund Oral History Project, and the UCLA Archiving the Age of Mass Incarceration Project. He is a fellowship mentor for Fanny Garcia Separated, a National Endowment for the Humanities project supported project documenting the lived experience of parents separated from their children at the U.S.-Mexico border under the zero tolerance policy in 2018. So welcome, Gabe. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to get it started. So if it would be just great to hear more about where did you grow up and how do you think where you grew up and your childhood shaped your life?
I love that question. Thank you for that, because I mean, maybe like a lot of memory workers, our upbringing, childhood experiences, our family is usually directly related to how we get into the work and how we approach the work. So I'm actually from Texas. I am from a small town called Seguin, which is near San Antonio, about an hour from Austin, 20 minutes from San Antonio. And my family has been in that area for many, many generations, long before it became part of the United States, back when it was sort of a barren northern province of Mexico. My family has been there. And so Seguin is an interesting place. It's a small but diverse town, but like a lot of small towns in the South, it's very much still run by the same white families that have been in power for 200 years. And it's still very segregated in terms of power and economic, educational, political opportunity. And so I actually write about my hometown quite a bit. I'm trying to move away from writing about my hometown because it seems like it just really just causes problems when I do that. But I can't seem to step away from it because, frankly, I'm full of frustration and anger about what I'm still seeing there. And you know, I was able to get out because I had an opportunity to go to university on the top 10% rule, which in Texas means if you're in the top 10% of your class, your graduating high school class, you get automatically admitted to a public university. And so I only applied to one place, UT Austin, because I got in automatically. And so I moved to Austin, and then that kind of set me on the path I'm on now. But Seguin, my whole family is still there. I still have a special place in my heart for the place, but it's problematic, and I want to do something about it. And a lot of it is really countering the false narratives and the lies that people in power in Seguin are telling still to this day. I would say even more so as a direct response to the Black Lives Matter movement, that they sort of press the gas on pushing out these narratives that Anglos came into Texas to basically save the day, to fight back violent Indians and to make it safe for Anglo settlers. That's sort of the narrative that they tell. Obviously, we all know that it's not as simple as that. It's much more complex. So I like that question because where I'm from and my relationship with my hometown still very much guides my approach to the work I do professionally. There's, for me, personal and professional just sort of all overlap and mix with each other. I think that's good in some ways, but it's also not great for work-life balance, obviously, because I love it so much. I feel like I'm just constantly working. So yeah, so that's where I'm.
Thank you. I really appreciate your sharing so much about where you're from and growing up and current day challenges. And I think that really leads into the next question, which is, and there may be some overlap, but was there a particular moment that inspired your journey into activism and community work? Is there just like this moment you look back in time? Some people say the moment they got radicalized, or just like they came to their work. And if there's a moment for you, we'd love to hear more about it.
There is a moment. It was sitting in the home of a family whose son had been executed in Texas. He was a young Black man. He was executed when he was 23 years old for a crime he committed when he was 17. And this isn't like early 20th century, late 19th century. This is 2000. So this wasn't like a long time ago. This was recent. And at that time, I had just come to work for Texas After Violence Project. The first time I was here, I came back later. And I was in my early 20s, kind of a aimless philosophy major, interested in human rights and the criminal legal system. And, but sort of in a superficial academic way. But sitting in that family's home and watching them reconstruct their story of the experience of, one, being working class and Black in East Texas, and then two, having their otherwise good son, a good guy, do a horrible thing. He committed a horrible act of violence, and no one was trying to make an excuse for that. But as a family, they had to figure out how to navigate that when the person that he killed was a very powerful white man. And everyone basically knew that because of the dynamics of the crime, that the state was going to pursue the death penalty for him with everything they had, and they did that. And there was a lot of, not surprising, extremely horrific racism and white supremacy sort of manifesting in the trial itself and with the jury. And his name was Napoleon Beasley. Napoleon really never had a chance. And so being with his family years later after the execution and watching them again try to make sense out of what happened. I mean, they're even years later, after their son had been executed, they're still trying to make sense of all the things that happened and went wrong for that to play out that way. And that changed everything for me. As a young person, being in the room and bearing witness in that way, completely transformed me, completely transformed my worldview, completely transformed my body in a way. I mean, when you're in sort of witnessing that grief, that level of grief coming at you. And I was never the same after that day. And that's, I sort of gave my life to this work after that experience. So it's interesting. There really was that one moment that really opened everything up for me.
Wow, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. Lael shared with us offline some of the writing that you've been doing. And I think kind of even in the storytelling now, this earnestness and vulnerability that you bring to your work, to your writing work, is also really significant. So I was wondering if you could describe what the significance of your writing practice to your life and work has been, and what's your writing process like?
I love these questions. Yeah, these are great. Writing is hard for me. It doesn't come easy. I got to put a lot into it. But I think like a lot of writers, particularly writers of color, we do it because we have to. We do it because, for me, I'll just speak for myself. I won't speak in general terms. I'll speak for myself. But I got into it because I was trying to make sense of what I was seeing in this work and experiencing, and just really trying to make sense of it. And so, sort of working through it by writing through it helped me do that. And in fact, the story I just told about Napoleon and his family was probably one of the first things I wrote. I ended up being published way, way later, like 10 years later, because I didn't really know how to navigate the publishing scene, which is problematic, that we all know too, is problematic. So for me, it was just trying to make sense of it and trying to come to some understanding of it, and then also trying to figure out what my role is in all of this too. And then, in some of my more personal writings about growing up as a very Americanized Mexican person in a small town still dominated by white supremacy, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of people of color, writers of color, who are trying to grapple with their identity living in this country at this time. And so I think a lot of that, I'm 36 years old, I'm still trying to figure this out. And writing for me has been a way to try to do that. My writing process is pretty messy. It starts with something that's sort of nagging me that I can't quite move away from. And then it sort of moves into a lot of notes, maybe over a year or two of just random notes that I'm sitting at a coffee shop or, at a bar or something and just taking notes. And then if it won't let me go, then it'll move into some kind of molding process to organize the notes. And then at some point, it looks something like a coherent thing where there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then I have friends that I trust who I can take to them and say, this is really bad, but I need you to tell me if there's potential here. And then, it kind of goes from there. I can sort of dialogue with trusted writers and readers in my life who can say, this is working, this has got to go. And then we can sort of get it to where it is. But then, like I said, and then taking it to that next level and trying to work with professional, usually white editors, is a whole other headache. The things that they're trying to cut, the things that they want to keep, and just sort of trying to convince them that I'm not really trying to get their permission to write this. I'm going to write it, and whether y'all can publish it or not, but I'm not really going to change it. And that's a battle for sure. So the writing process for me is messy. I love it. I could never do it professionally because I'm too slow. I can never make money from it because I'm only publishing like once every 2 or 3 years. So, but it's something that I love, and I'm trying to push myself to be a better writer and communicator. And, I probably have 20 ideas that I want to work into writing projects right now. So it's slow and messy, but it's such a, it's integral part of sort of me trying to make sense of who I am and what my role is in this crazy world we live in.
Thank you.
Thank
I don't
you.
know.
Yeah.
I didn't want to overstep what you wanted to follow up might say, Keandra.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, those 20 ideas, like, I can't wait to read them, even if it takes 20 years.
Oh, that's sweet. Thank you.
No, and thank you for just sharing again to that level, sharing your process and just how I love that you said it's messy. Like you kind of sometimes we think that writers are sitting somewhere and they know what they want to do and then you just have these drafts but like it can be a very difficult process, and then to hear that you have this close knit group of friends, this community that you trust and can be vulnerable with. 'Cause I also think writing is a very, as you know, can be a very vulnerable process. So to have someone you can actually go to and just bare yourself and trust them with that is also beautiful.
I would say probably most writers of color have that close-knit group that they can, because we have to convince ourselves that what we have to say is worth saying or worth sharing publicly. And so we got to go to the people who we love and trust to say, people need to hear this. Or else we would just, all of our ideas and writings would stay in our journals,
That is true. I totally agree with you, Gabe. Thank you. To transition from that, and thought to as a follow-up, thinking about again the Texas After Violence project specifically, how did you first start with TAVP and how did you come back to that project?
So like I said, I was sort of a wandering philosophy student, and was getting ready to graduate. I had this sort of vague idea that I'd go to law school. That seemed like a good thing to do. And so I was part of an incredible program called Rappaport Scholars, which is at UT, and it's a service scholarship program for first-generation students who don't come from a lot of money, sort of working class first-generation students. And it was that program essentially helped me get through undergrad in terms of scholarship money. It gave me a laptop and they gave me tutoring, so that sort of got me through undergrad. So I'm still grateful. I actually just had a meeting about something totally different with the granddaughter of the people who initiated that program. And it was so cool to tell her, how much her grandparents meant to me and what they did for me. So as part of that program, we had to do service hours. And one of the organizations that was on this list was Texas After Violence Project. It was a brand new organization and it just launched and they were looking for volunteers. I came in for a meeting with the first director, this woman named Virginia Raymond, who is a lawyer and activist here in Austin for many, many years, very, very progressive, very radical in her activism and legal work. And, she took a chance on me and brought me in as an intern. And in those early days at TAVP, the organization was just focused on the death penalty and murder. So the point of the organization was to use oral history as a method to have a deeper understanding of how people deal with the murder of a loved one and how people deal with the death sentence and the execution of a loved one, and to try to find the commonalities in those experiences, to try to, one, show that that the institution of the death penalty really doesn't bring closure to the murder victim survivors. And second, it actually just perpetuates so much more violence and harm through carrying it out. So that was sort of the mission of the organization at that time. And so when I came on as an intern, then when I graduated, they hired me for like $10 an hour, as a contractor. We were just traveling around, and this is something I write about a lot. It's like that experience of traveling around the state with a camera, documenting stories. So that's how I got involved. Stayed for a little while, and then moved to New York City, where I went to work with, at that time, one of our heroes at the organization at that time was this oral historian named Mary Marshall Clark at Columbia. And so when we moved to New York, because we liked her and her work because she really brought together sort of trauma-informed interviewing and human rights activism. She kind of was bringing those together in her work. And that's what we were trying to do in Texas. And so when I got to New York, I just emailed her and said, I'm a fan, I'm in New York, I'd love to have coffee. And she invited me in, and I don't know if this always happens like this, but she essentially hired me on the spot, because I said, here's what I'm doing in Texas. If there's ever an opportunity to get involved here, I'd love that. And there was. So that's when I got to work on the Rule of Law, Guantánamo Bay Oral History Project, which is very interesting work. to sort of do oral history memory work at that level in terms of a problem of that scope. So no longer were we just looking at the death penalty in Texas. I was suddenly working on global war on terror, horrific practices of detainee torture and abuse, and lining up interviews with everybody from people who'd been abused and tortured in these sites, whether Guantánamo or Bagram or CIA black sites, through sort of mid-level and upper-level government actors who played some role in the Bush administration in the post 9/11 war on terror, all the way up to Supreme Court justices who were involved in sort of landmark Supreme Court jurisprudence around issues around the war on terror, so-called war on terror. So, when I came back to Texas, I took a little bit of a detour and actually started working as an investigator on capital cases. So this was an office that was set up that would take on the appeals of people who had already gotten a death sentence, but that, these legal clinics and other sort of fancy law firms, they didn't want to touch these cases because they weren't innocent. They weren't, they want to get involved with the innocent cases where there's innocence, and they want to prove that the person's innocent and get them off death row. And that's wonderful. And I'm glad law firms do that. I'm glad law clinics do that. We were getting the cases where, the murder was on video. There was, maybe our client didn't have remorse. I mean, these really bad situations. But we also understood that no matter what you did, you deserve adequate legal representation, and you deserve a robust investigation for your case, whether that's on the fact side, that is whether they did it or not, or specifically more so what I did was on the mitigation side, which was to try to get the death sentence off the table, by essentially trying to convince the judge that the jury, when they sentenced our client to death, they didn't know enough about their life. And so my job, which is basically a form of oral history in a way, was to go into the communities of our clients. These are typically communities where I was seen as suspect, or people were skeptical to talk to me because I'm not from those communities. And so it was a lot of like knocking on doors and just trying to be real with people and to say, this is who I am, this is what I'm working on. I know you don't want to be involved in a capital murder case, but this is important to try to do the best that we can to put together a mitigation case for our client. Can I come into your home and ask you some questions? And, building that trust, and then using some of those interviewing skills to get people to open up about incredibly difficult, emotional, traumatic events in their lives, but in a way that wasn't, trying really hard not to ruin them in the process, and then take the information and then go, and I'm still trying to work through the problem that retributive justice systems put people in, to go into someone's home, re-traumatize them, have them sign a form, and then leave and never talk to them again. That is like the opposite of the ethics of care that a lot of memory workers try to integrate into our work. But when you're working within the framework of a retributive justice system that is ruthless in trying to get that death sentence or that life sentence or that 40-year sentence, it makes us do strange things like that. And so I've been trying to, in my own head, reconcile those things. And frankly, it's one of my, it's one of the reasons why I and TVP have increasingly taken an abolitionist posture on sort of how we approach, how we think communities ought to understand and respond to violence.
Wow, thank you. I mean, just in listening to you, even from our very first question, this stuff, the work that you're doing is very heavy. And yet, I have not had the pleasure, which I hope to in the future, been in a physical space with you, but just in talking to you, there's a light that still comes through you. There's a buoyance that still comes off from you. And I think that's really phenomenal in the context of the work that you're doing, that you still clearly have that in you. And so um, I definitely want to ask, like, thinking about the challenges that you've had to face in the work that you're doing. Texas After Violence, it's focused, it's centering those who have been incarcerated or are incarcerated, the impact of state violence on families, the impact of the death penalty on communities, and then thinking about all the roles and positions you've had before, and before TAVP, and the work that you continue to do in other areas. Just trying to think about, like, what are the challenges you've had to face, because I mean, I think the country in different pockets is clearly evolving a little bit about the death penalty. I don't think people aren't so quick to go there like we used to be. But there's definitely a lot of still push and pull with people trying to understand abolition. And so just thinking about all of that, like what are some of the challenges you've had to deal with?
A ton of challenges. I mean, the first for me, and something that I've been dealing with since that day that I mentioned in the Beasley's home till today, all these years later doing this work, is just like the impact of this work on my body and my mental health. That's something that I'm still trying to figure out, because we're human, and we're not built to take on this much grief, especially not only our own grief in our own lives, but when we're bearing witness in a very authentic way to the grief of other people. Our bodies aren't really meant to take that on. And so I've been trying to figure out a way to do the work and be healthy at the same time. And I'm not a saint, so I don't run every day. I probably should. I probably find maybe too much comfort in pasta, and in beer, and in
I'm not
sweets.
going to downgrade pasta on this podcast.
Like 5 days a week.
Pasta.
5 days a week. Okay. Yeah, we do a lot of pasta at our house. But I find a lot of comfort in eating, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's just about, I want to make sure that I'm in this work for the long game, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't want to this work is easily burnout territory for a lot of people, and I'm just trying to figure out a way to do it, because I want to commit my life to it. So that's a big challenge. Other challenges are a little bit more mundane, but they're still challenges, which is when I came back to TAVP, I came back as the executive director, which I was very reluctant to do, because even at that point, I knew that, in the nonprofit industrial complex, an executive director plays a very specific role. And in the early days, when we were a much smaller organization, when I came back in 2016, we were still small. I was still able to do the work. I was still able to go out and do interviews and really, think through a lot of the stuff that we were working on programmatically. But as we've grown, it's like the more attention your work gets, the more funding it gets. That's great. But the more problems you get, and the bigger your staff grows, that's wonderful. You're getting more capacity to do more work, but working with people is hard. And, trying to build an organization that is reflective of the principles that we're saying that we want to see in our community is hard. So you can't say, hey, we need to talk about our relations with one another, and we need to have understanding and compassion in our community, and then have a toxic nonprofit. That doesn't make any sense. So, so the challenges that I'm facing now are trying to be comfortable in my role, that I can't always do the very interesting, fun work that we're doing at TAVP. Because in my role, I'm really thinking about sustaining our organization financially, keeping my team happy and feeling like they're appreciated and valued in the organization, making sure we're all working together well, especially post-pandemic when we're remote and we're all over now. We're kind of sort of all spread out. And then I would say the other challenge that I'm dealing with too is trying to respond to all these emergencies happening and crises happening constantly in Texas and across the US. I mean, as a small organization, you know, we're trying to be smart and strategic about the work that we take on and prioritize. But I want to go in a lot of different directions because I feel like we're obligated to go in a lot of different directions in terms of, you know, how do we materially benefit the communities that we work with? You know, I think some people would say, well, ethically and carefully documenting their stories and preserving materials and making those materials publicly accessible in a very thoughtful, ethical way is a material benefit. But we want to go farther, you know, and really help people. And we want to go farther and really get involved with decarceration efforts, abolition efforts, police accountability efforts. You know, we all want to move that way, but we're trying to do it in a smart, thoughtful way because we're a small organization. We want to go home and spend time with our loved ones at the end of the day. We don't want to work 24/7, although we sometimes, I feel like we do. So right now, I guess what I'm saying is the challenges I'm navigating very much are more like organizational and trying to grow this organization in a impactful and thoughtful way, trying to keep a good team of people, trying to bring in more good people, and trying to push ourselves creatively to do this work. You know, recognizing that we may not always have the best ideas, so listening to what others are doing and learning. That's what I was saying before we started recording. Like, you know, Project Stand is one of those projects that we look toward for guidance. There are many others too that we look toward for guidance and saying, look how they're doing it, we should do it like that too. So the challenges have shifted, but they haven't, those early challenges haven't gone away. So I guess, you know, when I come to work every day, I'm just navigating challenges, if that makes sense.
You hit so many notes that was like hitting me in the chest right when you was talking, like, oh, I totally know what you're feeling. Yeah. Definitely as you're talking about trying to grow, but and strategically, and then all the things you're so passionate about, just you see want to also investigate and be a part of, but because you're still a small organization, trying to do it so that you don't dismantle yourself almost because of trying to take on so much at the same time. But I kind of feel the same way. Like we get hit with so many different things and so many things we want to do, and then it's just like, okay, we have to try to remember what the scope of our work is and what we try to our true north about what we said we wanted to do. But then there's so many other things we want that we feel there's still intersections there, but struggling with, okay, what's really our capacity? Like what's our capacity? What can we really take on?
Exactly. And that's why I think partnerships and collaborations have been so good for us, because I think we kind of like being small. Like, I think we would love to have more staff, of course, but I think there are benefits to being a small organization. That's not to say that, you know, I appreciate larger organizations and what they're able to do, for sure. And we've collaborated with larger organizations, and I'm sort of in awe of how those organizations are run. In order for there to be sort of cohesion on the team and sort of cohesion in terms of decision making and priorities. I'm very fascinated by how that works within organizations and big organizations. In a small organization, you know, we've been working all together for so long. You know, we kind of know where each other's strengths are. We kind of know you know, where each other's pressure points are, you know, don't touch that. And so I think we've built something really, really cool here. And like I said, if it were up to me, we would grow, but I want to figure out a way to do the work sustainably. And that's sort of a very nonprofit-y word. And I don't mean just financially. I mean, I really mean also in terms of like keeping good people with the organization and making sure that we're pushing them creatively so that they're not bored or that they don't feel like they're just doing the same thing every day. And again, like I said, partnerships and collaborations have been so useful for us because that's a situation where we don't have to shift everything we're doing to address an issue. We can work with someone who's better suited or better situated to work on an issue and sort of say, how can we help? So I think that's been good for us in recent years as well. But don't get me wrong, there's, we just did a 5-year plan, it's mostly a financial plan, but we did a little bit of programmatic planning. And my team had to sort of tell me to slow down a little bit because I wanted to bring in all this new stuff and they're right. They want to be more pragmatic and realistic about, 5 years isn't a long time. I mean, these years are flying by. And so, they had to sort of reel me in a little bit because I wanted to bring in all these new program areas and get involved with all this new work. I was like, let's start doing police data work. You know what I mean? Let's bring, and they're like, there are people.
No, not right now.
I'm like, let's get involved with misinformation and disinformation work, because that's essential too for the work that we're doing. In many ways, memory work is a form of countering misinformation and disinformation already. But I kind of want to. I'm curious about how we might get more into that work, recognizing that it's becoming such a prevalent issue these days. So anyway, there's so many ways I would go if it were up to me, but that's the challenge of just being realistic and not burning out your whole team in the process.
I love that I love the fact that y'all they can check in with you and be like, okay, we need to, like, y'all are that close knit. And I do think there's something to that when you can still have a close knit group. I feel like that keeps you a little more grassroots, a little more grounded, a little bit before you. But I do feel like sometimes things can get lost when you grow too far, too big sometimes. But so I love that y'all talk with each other like that.
They're always checking me. They're always telling me I'm wrong. They're always so and I'm open to it because they often have better ideas. So we go with those ideas. Just because someone has a title doesn't mean really anything. It's really just how we divide up our responsibilities. Certainly doesn't mean that I know more than anyone. It's we're just how we divide up our responsibilities is how I sort of approach it.
Thank you for that. I feel like this could be like a 5-hour podcast, but we ain't got that much time. I do want to make sure I ask, as we're talking about a few moments earlier, 5 days of pasta. So how do you take care of yourself? How do you balance self-care and activism and this organizing work that you do?
Yeah, like I said, I'm still trying to figure that out. There are days where my body is stuck in fight or flight, because I'm stressed out and I'm just sitting alone in my office. There's no one here. I'm safe. And yet my body is sort of freaking out because I'm feeling overloaded with work, with family responsibilities, with just trying to be a good person, and trying to be, like I said, take care of myself. And it feels overwhelming at times. And there are moments when I've thought, okay, I really need to step away from this work because my body is telling me to step away. But then I realize I'm never going to step away from the work. So I actually have to figure out, how to work on myself and my habits and my practices. And so, my approach is not, it's not innovative at all. It's what everybody will tell you when you're trying to take care of yourself, which is what I'm trying to do in terms of, mindfulness. I'm trying to get more sleep. I was never a good sleeper for many years. And then I would see, it's so fun, it's kind of horrible, but I would see videos of myself when I was doing an interview, like 2016, 2017, I look terrible. I mean, I look horrible because, I'm not sleeping, I'm not taking care of myself, and so that's been interesting for me to look back, and I can sort of just how I look, I can sort of track my mental health and how I am or am not taking care of myself at that time. So for me, it's those things. I run a lot because I found that running really does help clear my head. You know, a lot of people don't like running. I don't even really like running, but I do it because, like I said, it gives me that clarity, even if it's just for like an hour or two, where I can sort of reset and be present with my kid and my partner. And you know, I'm not great at stopping working. I mean, I work some weeks 7 days a week, but some of that's because I love the work. And so again, you know, I don't want to be shamed as a workaholic if I love my work, but I want to figure out a way to both love my work and work a lot and be a good dad and be a good partner and be a good friend and be a good brother. You know what I mean? And that's hard. That's hard. So I'm still trying to figure that out. I don't have the answers yet, but I'm working on it.
Well, it's just, as soon as you find some, make sure you share. I feel like with that, to do this work, I feel like that is an ongoing thing. Anyone who's doing this work, with that's something we're all struggling with. So thank you for sharing your process. That you're still working through it.
Yeah, people who are doing this work, we love. That's why we get into it. You know, we
Yeah.
love it, and we know how important it is. But it takes a toll for sure. You know, and not it. You don't even need to be working on state violence or human rights necessarily. Just sort of living in this country as a person of color is,
Yeah.
you know, that alone is, you know, takes a toll on the body and the mind. So then when you add on the memory work around violence and loss and trauma and survival, it just, you know, we have to, for me, I just have to prioritize that a little bit, you know. So something that was interesting that I found myself doing the other night, my partner started going to labor at 3:30 in the morning, and I panicked, and I went for a run at 4 o'clock in the morning because that was my body was saying, put on your shoes and go outside and move around, because I was nervous about what was going to happen that day, because you have all these thoughts about things that could go wrong, you know, at least I do, that's anxiety. And so I was like out in my neighborhood at 4 a.m., you know, like, you know, I'm sure if anybody was aware, like, what is this guy doing? But you know, but that was my, you know, I just knew that was going to get me through that day. And so even though, you know, it's hard to put on your running shoes at 4 a.m., that was just what I found that I needed to do in that moment. And it got me through, you know, a long, crazy day when my daughter was born.
Oh, that it's something, I don't know, something about that. That's the whole totality of that. It just sounds beautiful at the same time. You're working through that and trying to be ready, get ready.
Because if I didn't run, I would have just been a total anxiety stress ball the whole day.
The whole
And
time.
would not have been pleasant to be around. So that was just my little way of just trying to take control of the situation.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do 4 o'clock in the morning game, but maybe I'll try some other time during the day. I don't know about 4, right? That good.
I don't think I'll do that again. Yeah.
But what you said?
I said I don't think I'll do that again. You know, that's a little.
Thinking about, again, as you were mentioning, memory work, and thinking about really, again, about the pieces that you've written and how impactful they've been for us and the group and others who have written work. In 2018, you did the piece Reflections on Archives of Violence and Transformative Justice. And you mentioned how TADP was inspired by Michelle Caswell's concept of liberatory archival imaginary. And could you revisit that concept with our listeners? And the role that concept you think plays in memory work?
Yeah, Michelle Caswell, I mean, like a lot of people, her approach to sort of bringing in recognition of community archives within the sort of academic archives world, I think is important. I'm not in academia, but I appreciate her recognizing the importance of the work and centering it in her research. And particularly one talk that she gave in Austin that I attended really sort of made me realize it was just like another layer of why our work is important. And, you know, that kind of got me thinking about this sort of, you know, what is the relationship between truth and what someone believes to be true and what someone needs to be true so that they can heal after violence, after their loved one has been murdered by the police, or in jail or prison, or by the state. And so the concept of archival imaginary became very interesting to me because I realized that we were actually capturing a lot of that in the stories that we were documenting. It was a lot of family members. It was, like I mentioned at the top, of the family trying to make sense of their young son being pursued and executed by the state, all the way through to this case that I talk about often, with the loved ones of another young Black man who died in Harris County, Houston jail. And there's a lot of questions around what happened there. And, on video, they're trying to figure out what happened to their brother. And, because it's not captured on surveillance video. And so they're in real time on the recording, trying to make sense of what could have happened and working through scenarios, and then finally settling on one that gives them some path for some kind of understanding, or probably never have emotional closure, because who could ever recover from losing a loved one like that? And so it's not just Michelle Caswell. There are many other thinkers and writers and practitioners, frankly, outside of academia, that are pushing my understanding of this work as well. Many people that we all know already as well. So when I'm able to engage with others' ideas around that, it just makes me commit more and more to this work, because I'm realizing how important it is. At some point, you recognize the documentation itself is important for so many reasons. The relationship and community building is important for so many reasons. Preserving and protecting endangered materials, and in this case, stories that actively challenge a police account of something, or a state account of something, those are endangered stories. Those will be actively erased. And sometimes that erasure actually looks like threatening or killing the person, the carrier of those stories, or the carrier of those counter narratives. This isn't hypothetical. This has been happening throughout the history of this country. And so the preservation piece of it, the protection piece of it, the public accessibility piece of it is important. The some people call activation of the archival materials piece of it is important. Every level of our work is critical. And you could take one of those and isolate it and talk about how important it is. And, so all those processes that I laid out, those are sort of material processes, but then there's that imaginary piece, that emotional or spiritual aspect of the work that is equally important, that, we don't always set out to document, but it comes through in how people retell their experiences living through violence and grief, and trying to survive that. And at some point my understanding of our work shifted too, because and I talked about this in a couple of presentations I'd given over the years, but how we I always thought we were an archive of violence, but we're an archive of survival, because these stories are really documenting how people find survival and joy and happiness, even having lived through something horrific like the loss of a loved one to violence. This work does all of that. These small groups and organizations doing memory work, community memory work, we're doing that every single day. And I get frustrated sometimes. This is the nonprofit industrial complex piece that frustrates me. I get frustrated that funders don't seem to recognize that. Mm-hmm. They seem to latch on to a very specific thing and want to fund that, but there seems to lack a sort of holistic understanding of why this work is so essential, and why we need to not only fund it, but one thing that TAVP has been actively involved in recent years is trying to be involved in building a network of they don't necessarily have to be archives, but groups that are doing memory work around the country, around all the issues that people of color, LGBTQ plus, trans people, you name it, people who are incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, all these issues that we're facing, we ought to be doing sort of transformative community memory work around all these issues, all over the country, all over the world. And so I think TAVP, we're just trying to figure out a way to support that. And in many ways, we've added on an element of our work. So we sort of do our core work around documentation, archiving, public programming. But now we've added this other major piece of it, which is just being a resource for other groups, for individuals trying to learn how to do this work or trying to, come into this work and just trying to help other people do it in a way that we found to be effective, and always trying to keep in mind the fact that a lot of the decisions, and again, you all in this room, this isn't new to you, but recognizing that a lot of the decisions that need to be made around how documentation happens, how preservation and access happens, all these materials need to be made by the people who are living through it, not by professionals necessarily with credentials. I mean, professionals with credentials are great and they should be part of it, but also recognize that sometimes we have to step back and be more of a coordinator or a facilitator or an administrator or a fundraiser, and then bring in people who live through it. That's not groundbreaking, but it's also doesn't seem to be widely in practice either in some of the more sort of institutional funders or repositories or research centers, whatever. So again, you all, this isn't surprising anybody here, but maybe not anyone listening to this, but it is something that I think we need to do better about educating others who are who have power and who have especially power over funding decisions and things like that, to sort of make sure that they understand why this work is so essential.
No, thank you. And like you said, there's been so many people like Burgess Jules, we documented now, that's done foundational work around conversations around community archives and liberatory work. And think about Jerry Drake as well, about liberatory archives and abolition work. So I mean, there's like so many amazing voices that's been very critical to these conversations that the list is long. The list is long.
This is long. And I owe all those people and so many more so much, because they're the ones that have taught me all of this. I didn't come up with any of this on my own. I'm just listening and watching what others are doing, and bringing it into our work here. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the list is long. There's some incredible people in our community of memory workers here, and it's pretty incredible if you think about it. Yeah.
We need to do a part 2 because I have some other questions I want to ask you, but I want to pass the mic to Keandra. But again, thank you for this conversation thus far. And if I'm going to pass the mic to Keandra.
Thank you. So you touched on a little bit of this, but what are some of the specific ways that you make sure projects you're involved with support community members and aren't just merely extracting information from community members? Like, what are some of the ways that you can do that in practice?
Well, I think for starters, just, making sure that how we approach community members who we might want to partner with to bring in stories or materials into our digital archive, just the process of being totally transparent and honest about what that would look like and what our role is, what their role is. I think that's, for starters, again, everyone here will know that that's sort of 101, how we should treat community members that we work with. Beyond that, what we've also tried to do at TAVP has been to recognize, as I said before, that we're not the experts. We are coordinating expertise and lived experience, and trying to bring in people who have direct experience around our issue areas, state violence and all the ways it manifests, into our work in substantive ways. So not just, as a, outside advisor or something, but we have developed a community advisory council that has people on it who have direct lived experience with our issue areas. There are formerly incarcerated women, the mother of a man who was executed, and other memory workers who we can go to get guidance from on ethical issues, on issues around how we prioritize work. We have been very careful and thoughtful about how we transition into more direct advocacy that I mentioned before, trying to think about what our role is there and trying to listen to people in our community to tell us what they think our role might be there. So I think those are important ways to do it as well. One thing that we did was we launched a program called the Visions After Violence Fellowships. And fellowships is sort of an academic word, but this is not for academic people. This is for people with direct lived experience, and it's an opportunity for us to, again, play a support role. So our VAV fellows, they come in and they do their own memory work project, digital memory work project with their communities. And we just sort of support them and guide them, and you know, there's a stipend so that they could free up some of their time to work on it. I think it's $10,000 or $11,000, and then, you know, $2,000 for supplies, and then of course access to us and others in our network who might have expertise that we don't have to help guide them. So, for example, one of our fellows wanted to make a documentary this year, and you know, we're not documentary filmmakers, so we connected her with someone who could guide her on that. So I think moving more in that direction and just, again, playing that facilitation role, playing that role of bringing people together. And also, frankly, the money piece is important because we try to compensate people fairly and as often as we can. So we take labor very seriously. And so a lot of my role, like I said before, is making sure that we're bringing in the money to be able to, and sometimes compensation isn't necessarily about the transfer of money from one hand to the other. Sometimes it's just a recognition that we value your time and that we value the labor that you're going to put into this, even if it's just an hour meeting, you know. And so I think all of those ways are ways that we're trying to do that at CAVP. But, you know, obviously there are other ways too that I think that we can grow in to make sure that we're doing that in a way that feels right for us. One more example I'll just give is, you know, I've been pretty focused on making sure that people within our community who have an interest in governance, the nonprofit governance, can come onto our board of directors. And if they're interested in learning skills around, you know, growing and governing a nonprofit and sort of all the work that goes into that, then we want to be able to bring people like that onto our board and compensate them. And so that's, you know, usually I'm reminded constantly from people that board directors usually aren't compensated and they're usually giving money to the organization. And my response to that is, who cares? Like, I don't care. We're going to do it this way. You know, we're going to do it this way because I don't care that maybe we could raise X amount of dollars from rich donors who could be on our board. That doesn't matter to me. We could still go out and get that funding if we need to. What matters to me is bringing people who have the lived experience, who have the interest and the passion for the work involved at all levels of our work, including community council, board of directors, and any other ways that they want to be involved, including trying to bring more onto staff too, and we have staff openings as well. So we're trying to like attack it from all different ways, but I know that there are other, I'm always interested to see how other groups are doing this too, how other organizations are doing this too. One last thing I'll mention, I know we're almost out of time, is a project we're working on now that deals with historical records of the death penalty that we have. And, you know, I think initially we thought our obligation as a community archive was to get these records into the public domain as quickly as possible, because not surprisingly, they're incredibly illuminating in terms of how white supremacy manifests in the legal system in Texas back then and today. But because we're always trying to grow and evolve in terms of how we approach the work, we realized that maybe we weren't best positioned to make that decision. And so we sort of shifted focus and basically throughout the timeline on that project and started doing the slow work of building relationships with descendants of people who are represented in the records to get them involved in some of these important decisions around access, permissions, use, materials, etc. And that is slow work. But we also recognize that that it's important, and we'll learn from that process, and we can share what we learn from that process with other practitioners who might be interested in bringing that into their work as well. And so, you know, we're just trying to push ourselves in this way, and we're still learning every day about how to do it better, if that makes sense.
Oh, thank you so much for that.
Well,
Leah, you have comments?
no, I mean, so much, like I said, so many things. I've been inspired by this conversation. I know I want to make sure we get to do our Blueprint 5 rapid fire questions with you, but I really wish I want to do a part 2. Just keep that on the radar, Gabe.
I'm totally gonna do part 2 anytime you want to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would love a part 2 because just all the little breadcrumbs that you just dropped, and I'm like, oh, let's go on this journey right now.
Yes.
Yeah, but now it's time for our rapid fire questions that we call the Blueprint 5. So what are you doing for self-care right now?
Well, I just went for a run before I came here. That's why I was late. That's why I'm drinking lots of water. You know, and yeah, exactly. And I am really looking forward to, I mean, you know, I got a newborn at home, and you know, nights are, I don't know if y'all got kiddos or not, but nights are tough with newborns because there's not a lot of sleep going on. But it's also just, you know, it's just amazing to, I mean, I haven't even processed that she was born yet. It's like I'm like 3 days in, and it still hasn't really clicked for me yet. So you know, for me right now, moving my body, staying hydrated, eating good food, and being with my family, I think is what's how I'm doing self-care today.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what is a piece of advice you'd want everyone to know?
That's a good one. I've been thinking about this actually, and I think it's surrounding yourself with good people. You know, not just professionally, you know, but in your personal life as well, and getting rid of people who aren't good, you know, who might be toxic or who might be bringing out parts of you that you don't like. Just letting those people go, including personally and professionally, you know, and that's awkward sometimes in a professional context to say, look, this isn't working, you know, but you got to do it because it's about protecting the good folks around you. And when I say good, I don't mean yes people who are just going to stroke your ego. I mean people, like I said earlier, who are going to say, I hear that idea. Here's why I think we should go this way. And then we could talk it out. And I'm serious when I say most of the time, my colleagues are right about things. I want to rush something, or I have, you know, I tend to be impulsive about a lot of things, including decision making at work. And I'm so glad that I have really, really, really thoughtful, compassionate, caring people who tell me often, slow down, let's think about this a different way. And that's the reason why TVP is successful, to be perfectly honest with you. It's not because of me, it's because the people who are involved in this organization.
I like that. Build your own community. So what song is your jam at the moment?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm making a playlist right now for our community. We're having a community archives convening. I think, are y'all coming? I think someone from Project Stand is coming potentially in November. And so, you know what? Let me just pull this up really quickly. I know we've got a lot of time, but it's right here. I've been really into, I think she's been around for a while, but her name is Mala. She's like a Spanish hip hop artist. I like her a lot. She's kind of like aggressive in her rapping, which which is good. I like it when I'm working out, but it may not be good for like a convening of community archives, but there's definitely gonna be some Mala music in there. And I've also been revisiting Santi Gold lately. I've been liking a lot of she's been putting out. I'm just looking at my list that I've been making here. Sudan Archives is on there, of course. So yeah, I've kind of been there thinking about what kind of music I want to play when we get all these memory workers together in a room in November.
Something
I
else to add
love
to your
that.
playlist.
Definitely adding to the playlist. I love Santi. Santi's a friend of mine, so I always love to hear people listen to her.
Oh, wow.
I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan.
Wow. Good
Yeah.
show that, Keandra.
Many
Keandra got a
lives I've
whole
lived.
crew. Right. Keandra got a whole crew of celebs.
uh, so we may know the answer to this, but what's bringing you joy this month?
Definitely the new kiddo, and seeing my other daughter Sophia interact with her is something that I've been like waiting on. I've been just waiting, and so seeing them together is bringing me a lot of joy. My partner is just finishing up medical school. She has, she went back to medical school at 31 years old, and started at that point, and it was a social worker before that. And she had to work. I mean, I think all medical students work hard, but she was doing this as someone who was later in her career, who's a mom, and was living away from us while she was doing it. And not surprisingly, she knocked it out of the park. She did amazing. She's getting interviews for residency at all the top programs she wanted to go to. And so seeing those interview requests roll in for her, and seeing her, I'm constantly saying to her, like, damn, this is cool. Like, you're just pursuing your dreams, like right now. You're just doing it. That's pretty cool to watch other people who you love achieving that. So I think seeing how our family is coming together, seeing my partner finish extremely difficult 4 years. And it seems like things are coming together a little bit. So I'm getting joy from that.
So, medical school.
I know, I'm like, all the high fives, like,
I
yeah.
know. With kids,
Right,
oh my God.
Going back to school.
Right, like all the high fives. We are rooting for you.
She's awesome. She never complained once. I complain about everything. I'm like, it's too hot, it's too cold, I'm thirsty, I'm hungry. She never complains and just does it. It's incredible.
Awesome.
So our final question is, what's one thing you're excited about for the rest of 2022, or what are you excited about for the new year?
I'm excited about this convening that I mentioned, because again, it's just our role as TVP of just trying to not lead, but move forward a network of memory workers around the country who can support each other. I'm excited about that. I'm excited that my team has put a lot of work into organizing this. So I'm excited to see that happen. The new year. So one thing we try to do at TVP2 is we try to take most of December off, because we've been working hard all year. And by the end of November, especially now this year with this gathering, we're gonna be pretty tired. So, I'm hoping that in December I can get back into doing some of my creative work that has really been on hold for the last several months, because things have been so crazy at work and in my personal life. As I mentioned before, my partner was living away from us for the past 15 months. She'd come back on weekends, but I was raising my 4-year-old solo, so trying to run TVP, raising a 4-year-old, a wild child, 4-year-old solo. I didn't have a lot of time or energy to write and read all these books that are coming out and articles that I can't keep up. There's so much amazing thinking and writing happening, particularly for writers of color, that I'm just like, I just can't keep up. So I'm looking forward to that. And in the new year, I'm just really curious to see where this organization is going to go next year. We've been growing so quickly that it's been exciting to like see that growth. It's been scary at times, because as I mentioned before, the more you bring in people on the staff, the more money you got to bring in to keep people with their jobs. And I don't really not in the place where I'm trying to bring in people for a little while and then say, hey, sorry, we got, so, but this organization is doing really great things. Like I said, we're building more and more collaborations and partnerships with people who inspire us. So 2023, I think, is going to be even bigger, better year than 2022 was, than 21, than 20. We're just on a really interesting trajectory right now, and I'm just happy to be a part of it.
Woo, like I said, part two.
Christina, I'll be, yeah.
One of the things that I don't know about anybody else, but one thing that keeps ringing in my head as I've been listening to you during this whole episode is like the body as an archive, and just thinking about what has happened to the people for which you are trying to serve and be in community with. And I think about you as you're saying like those rough years, and you could see it like in your body, like you have images of it in your body, like how important all the things that, again, when I think about everything that you're doing and how trying not to hold all of that in you, because we're not built for that. And just also, again, I go back to the light that I still see in you, and just wishing and hoping that that stays in you as you continue to do this amazing work. And just thank you for sharing that light with us today. And just looking forward to, we got a partner, we got to figure out, how we can continue these conversations and support one another, because I just really appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you do.
I thank you so much, Leo. And I was a little surprised to get the invitation, to be honest, because I hold y'all up here, and I thought, how do they know about me and our work, So I was like,
I'm looking at you. I'm like, woo.
That's how it should be in a community of people working, on similar issues, is mutual respect and love for each other and just wanting to help each other. And I find a lot of that, again, not surprisingly, people doing this work, I find a lot of that, and Burgess has been one of those people who's become a friend in recent years. I texted Burgess, I think last night or 2 nights ago, and said, hey man, I'm going to need some advice from you this week. Can I give you a call? And he said, of course, I'm happy to talk things through. So he I go to Burgess for advice definitely on funding, because he's been around that. But I go to, stuff on parenting and, how to build a team. And so people like Burgess and so many others, Michelle Caswell, Samid Malik over at SADA, Jarrett, so many people that I lean on for help and for guidance. So thank you. And I will also say we should do this anytime, and it doesn't have to be in the form of a podcast. It could just be like we could just share ideas with each other. I think that would be really great too, and we would welcome that.
Down for that. And all the high fives on our people you just mentioned, like community and all those people that have been important to me as well. Definitely been able to, I will text Jared, I will text Burgess like with a quickness, like, y'all, there's such and such going on. So
Exactly.
appreciate their consultation over the years for sure. But yeah, this will not be the last. So thank you, Gabe. Thank you. I don't know if anybody else want to say anything else before we wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will see you. All right. Thanks everyone who tuned in today. Bye.
Okay.